negative. I negate the resolution. The United States is justified in intervening in the internal political processes of other countries to attempt to stop human rights abuses. Judge, I would like to make an observation before proceeding with this case. My observation is that we must use a utilitarian paradigm for this debate as we are considering the actions of the United States as an agent against the backdrop of the international arena. The value for this debate is justice. By justice, I mean maintaining the conditions of equality amongst sovereign nations acting as independent agents on the international stage. My value criterion for this debate is upholding justice, maintaining political stability on an international scale. The reason that we uphold justice in this way is to avoid a wide-scale international conflict which would consume the lives and resources of not just one but multiple nations on a massive scale. An international conflict on such a scale would leave multiple areas of the world ravaged and in a state of anarchy where fear is the sole dictator of one's actions, an environment which justice cannot exist in any form whatsoever, an environment where human rights abuses become the norm. I'll have three contentions. The intervention hurts the country upon which the intervention is being undertaken, that the intervention hurts the United States, and that the intervention hurts the world as a whole. Contention one, the U.S. intervention in the internal political processes of another country is harmful to that country. As it has been demonstrated by numerous failed interventions by the U.S., the United States either ends up establishing a dictatorship or, in pursuit of democracy, leaves the country less politically stable than it was before. This shows disregard for cultural and political commitments of sovereign nations and oftentimes decimates a country's ability to provide for its citizens' basic needs. This creates a sense of fear and insecurity amongst the people of that nation who are left to rebuild and reorganize once the United States forces are gone. Intervention through violence or economic sanctions is not simply targeted at the government offenders, but instead has collateral impact on all people. An example of this would be Iran, where economic sanctions against the Iranian government have resulted in even more severe decline in the quality of life in the Iranian people. The intended result to change the government policies has not been achieved, and the unintended results, deprivation of the people, continues. Contention two, intervention in the internal political processes of foreign countries hurts the United States. The intervention, either militarily or through humanitarian aid, requires the commitment of U.S. resources. These resources might otherwise go to the meeting of needs of U.S. citizens within the homeland. Furthermore, the interventions pursued with these resources are intended to have a beneficial effect on the perception of the United States in the eyes of the oppressed peoples, but history has shown that the response to intervention is often negative, either because of the actions of the U.S. military or the propaganda of the foreign government that is experiencing the intervention against its will. The people of foreign countries often see the United States as the oppressor rather than their own government, either by posing direct retaliatory this leads to, by either posing direct retaliatory threats against aid workers or military personnel, or through international discord, which at its worst may result in acts of terrorism against the U.S. Contention three, intervention by the United States harms the international community. By intervening in the internal political processes of other nations, the United States acts as a hegemonic power. This results in the rest of the world viewing the United States through a realist lens. The three forms of behavior that come from the realist lens are fear. One, fear, because there's no understanding or predictability regarding potential actions by the U.S. in the future. Two, the system of self-help. The foreign governments observe the United States acting as a sole power and feel it necessary for them to act in similar ways to disassociate with international organizations in an attempt to self-preservation. It is a defense mechanism based on the fear created by the U.S.'s unilateral action. Three, maximization of relative power. When the United States takes the administration of justice into their own hands and violates the sovereignty of another nation, each nation then believes that they must guard against such action and must act in ways to defend that and or to exhibit their own preemptive acts to try and establish parity with the U.S. This is a classic example of the tit-for-tat mode of international relations that game theory predicts in these cases. One example of this is like the Cold War. Once a nation acts to intervene in the political affairs of another nation, other nations act to reestablish a hegemony on their contemporary climate, and this is sure to mean violence on a large scale. Therefore, the United States is not justified in intervening in the internal political processes of foreign nations to stop human rights abuses because it violates fundamental principles of justice that require the maintenance of political stability on the international scale. For these reasons, I urge you to negate. So, on to my opponent's case. Her value was liberty, but so we need to look to justice because the whole purpose of like sovereignty is to provide like this equality. And so like that is the most important. That is why there are sovereign states. Okay, so she goes on to the social contract, but by using that, she actually contradicts her whole argument, because by this logic, the U.S. would actually have to like support their own people first before the intervention. So we can see that unilateral intervention under her plan fails. So we have to look to her plan of like multilateral intervention, which she goes through the ICIS, which she said is a Canadian establishment. And so this falls outside of the realm of the resolution, because it says that the United States is justified, not Canada, not any of those other nations. It's directly dealing with the U.S. And so she also says that it's morally necessary, but if we're, I would say that it's actually morally necessary more to maintain political stability, so that we don't have like a nuclear holocaust. Because I would rather, I would not want to be dead, right? Like, we gotta look at the big picture. This, by not intervening, we are maintaining a more like stable world. And so a little example in her contention one, how if any of these abuses occur, we have to dive in. So like if one person doesn't eat one meal like in the day, I have to send this giant force in. Like that's just illogical. So she doesn't really have a grounds of which the UN goes in, so her approach to multilateralism fails as well. So really, I mean, she's advocating a plan that goes, she's advocating arguments that go against the social contract and are ineffective as a whole. So for these reasons, I urge you to negate.